I have a question about sinking into the key. Now, one of the things that helped me along the way to regain some of the facility that I was looking for was to find a way to stand on the keys. Now, this isn't how you want to play all the time. You don't want to be onto the keys with all your weight. And yet, there was something about standing into the key bed that really helped me find myself. Can you talk about whether this is advisable, or was I in error? Did I make a mistake?
I don't know quite what it means. Could you show me what it means? Or
Sure. Like if you'll just play a middle C with your third finger.
yeah,
Now, you talked about the finger as a kind of a leg. What if you actually, of course, you're not going to put your full weight on there, but if you begin to increase the weight so that you actually feel like you're bearing weight on your hand there. Yeah, and maybe play walking up and down the keys with the second and third finger back and forth just to feel the weight shift. So this is a new experience for you. What is it like for you, given your arsenal? Does it helpful, or is it? Do you think it's a
I
problem?
don't like the feel of it,
Hmm.
um, but maybe that's because I'm getting rather old and I don't like putting that much weight on my fingers.
And nor should you when you play, I imagine. And
Yeah,
yet, if for somebody like me that had no sense of my arm or my fingers, it provided it. It gave me a sense. When I do it on this tabletop, I can feel all the way up into my shoulder, a wonderful sense of connection. Um,
yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And of course, that has to be let go. You can't play that way. But just like with the rotation, once you feel it, you can do it to lesser and lesser extents so that as you're bearing some kind of weight on your hand, as you're feeling the weight of the key, you have an understanding of what that connection in the shoulder would be.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it does because I think that connection between the shoulder, but um,
And further, but all the way to the ribs, in fact, because the ribs are moving as those fingers
yeah,
are moving.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like the idea that the sound is flowing out of you, you know, from your back, if you like, down
Hmm.
down into the piano, beyond that, then out of the piano and into the air, and then kind of you're creating this kind of circle of things. That really kind of frees this feeling of opening out into playing. I think is really important.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's interesting how you're talking about connecting not just to the piano, but beyond it, almost like swinging at a ball and not stopping at the ball, but continuing to follow through
I
with
was
your
thinking that
eyes.
very
And
thing. Just as you say, yes,
yeah,
yeah,
so that
yeah.
you're connected to the stadium you're hitting that baseball into. And yeah, it's an
Yeah, to
important
kind of
concept.
follow through. So the music is actually going somewhere.
Yeah,
You're creating something movement, and it's going into somebody's ear. It's going into their imagination, and you could go further. It's going. It's changing their life, perhaps.
yeah. Or so that they may be actually able to feel something of what you're
Yeah,
doing, like register the feeling that you're providing to them through your sound, as we
yeah,
talked about, feeling with our ears.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Well, how are you so interested in the piano? Were you ever injured yourself, for instance?
Yes, I was, but I think I became interested because um, there are some things I found very easy to do, but then there are other things which I found very difficult, and I just wanted to know how things worked. And I found a book by Thomas Fielden called The Science of Piano Technique, which I still believe is a really good book. And my teacher took it away immediately and discussed it with her colleagues and said, "No, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. You don't want to know all this stuff. It's very bad for you," kind of thing. So she took it away. And eventually I got it back and I had a good read. So there was a fear of the fact that if you knew how it worked, you would become unmusical or something.
Hmm.
And I just found out that what people were telling me to do didn't seem to make sense, and I wanted to find out why that was. And I found out by just finding what actually happens what muscles do what, and how the principles of leverage and that sort of thing, direction, what works and what doesn't work.
Well, you ended up studying with Ernest Empson, and from the little I've read, he seems like a fascinating person.
He was an amazing person, yeah. I mean, he really, I mean, from a musical point of view, he would, he had lessons with Godowsky, and he met Busoni, and he was friends with all kind of Joachim. He was a friend of Joachim, and he Godowsky was very keen on being able to be relaxed when he played fast, and he would get pupils to stop at any point, and just to show how relaxed he was. You know, it was the rest of his hand, only that tiny spark of energy was making the note. The rest of the hand was like putty, as he said. Was like it was in a, you know, in a trance.
Yeah.
So the music, the movement made was just tiny, just a tiny spark of energy, and most of the time he was just completely relaxed, and that was a very important principle with him. Beyond that, Empson really taught me a lot about listening, and he just would not tolerate, you know, a wrong sound and a badly balanced chord or anything like that. He said, you know, even if it was very soft, I wasn't allowed to have a note missing, and I wasn't allowed to have it. It had to have a core to the sound, even if it was very soft.
So we're not talking about missed notes. We're talking about missed opportunities to play well.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, countless things about. I mean, the piano becomes so exciting when you get this kind of three-dimensional view. How are we going for time?
We're doing fine. We
All
have
right.
no limit.
So you know, if you're playing a series of, and you could play them, or you could play. You could go on, but
Yeah.
I mean, so every piece you play is this opportunity to find your own sound. You've got a choir of 10 singers there, and you can have the tenors come out more on the altos. It becomes so exciting when you have music happening on different levels.
I want to
So
point out to our audience, some of whom may not be pianists, that what you just did was you played the exact same notes 5 or 6 times, but you voiced it different. So you brought
that's
out
right.
different fingers. It was pretty remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one thing that interests me is, you know, one of my favorite pieces is the Schubert B flat sonata, and I spent a lot of time trying to find the sound I wanted to make in that, and you find that people playing exactly the same notes, and it doesn't matter whether you play on a different piano. Everybody is going to have a different voice on the piano. They have a different sound. So if you play. And some people like Brindle, like for example, if I dare mention other people, quite a bright sound. So sound really squeezing into the top note a bit more. Arel does something really interesting. He uses the thumb in the right hand and the middle note in the left hand again. So you're hearing that a lot. It's good, very rich. Sounds like a different piano, but then it's so. So it's just so much fun, and I think I'm really sorry that some pianists don't experience that joy of finding all these sounds on the piano.
Yeah, yeah. I'm working on the Chopin. I believe it's the E major etude, the
Oh
slow.
yeah, yeah.
And I think I've been stuck on the idea that there's really the best way to play it, and maybe I should be having more fun with it.
Yeah, always have fun. If the option is having fun or not having fun, choose having fun.
Well, that's a yeah. Is there time to have fun? Is that okay?
I think so. Yes.
Well, who are some of your favorite pianists? Who have you loved?
Um, uh, mm, many really. I keep coming back to Horowitz for some reason. Not for the fast playing, but the
Yeah,
colours.
yeah.
Always in the colours. Um, they change. The pianists have been different at different times in their lives as well.
Mm-hmm.
I love Rubinstein's sound, and I mean, the rubato. That it's very interesting watching people like Horowitz playing, listening to him playing a mazurka, for example, or listening to him playing Bach or Mozart, and you suddenly realize that all the talk in in conservatories now about performance practice, IPP, informed performance practice, IPP, that's what it is. Yeah, and you can have chairs in it. You can have a chair in IPP, and you can find out how people played in those days, which I think is marvelous. It's really important. I'm so glad they're doing that. But the result is coming back to people like Horowitz, the way he played Mozart at the time. Oh, people say, oh, you can't pull music around like that. It's not decent. It should be following score. But now you find that Mozart did it, and he improvised and he changed the notes as he played, as Chopin did, as Beethoven did,
Yeah.
as Bach did, and Glenn Gould as well. I mean, he was kind of labeled as crazy because he did things with Bach and ornamentation and now you find that the sort of top early music players are sounding very like Gould suddenly
Mm-hmm.
did then. So these Horowitz and Gould people like that were actually doing just what felt right to them, wasn't inspired. They didn't worry about what other people thought. They played in a way which seemed right. And I think that's possibly not a bad way to go, really.
Well, Gould is an interesting case because his piano technique is very odd, sitting very low to the piano.
Yeah,
And of course, he did suffer. Hard to know how much of this was from his piano position and just how much of it was from, his mind, but he suffered lots of pain. And,
he did. Yeah.
and so what's your take on Glenn Gould in general, whom I love, by the way? I love his work.
Well, I do too, and I think that he was so misunderstood in his time. But I think that I'm fascinated by that story about his teacher. Sorry, his name escapes me now. Never mind, it'll come to me. Who apparently went to a Chinese circus at one point, and he saw a sort of 3-year-old boy doing an incredible dance routine. And he went backstage and he asked the ringmaster, or whoever it was, how he taught the boy to do this. He said, "Well, I just got him to relax completely. And then I put him in his legs in these positions and said, just remember that sort of thing." So he was completely relaxed, but he was put in the position. That's where they got the idea. Glenn Gould got the idea of finger tapping. You have the fingers absolutely relaxed, and you just do that with the other hand. But if you notice what happens to the finger when you're doing that, it bends, it unbends in the way it does when you're using intrinsic muscles.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, what Gould was doing was training himself to use that intrinsic touch where the fingers are opening out. Um,
Well,
yeah,
what's the transition though? Because as we've just discussed, if I push down on it, it's not the same movement as if I'm doing it intrinsically, and there's got to be a transition somehow.
I think when you mean your finger standing.
No, I'm talking about if you do the finger tapping. Just as we talked about, if someone comes along and moves your arm for you, it's not the same movement as if you move your arm. So if you're tapping that finger, you're enacting your body in a whole different way than if you're tapping it without pushing down on it.
I
So,
think I think you can still learn from it. I mean, if you do that and you feel what it's like,
mhm.
and you watch what's happening, and then you imitate that movement.
I see.
Maybe it's that, but maybe that was one of Gould's problems, that he. I don't know. It's a very interesting question. I don't know the answer to that.
I think you answered it. It was something about the way you were observing. That, you know, when someone takes your arm, I experienced this in conducting class years and years ago. I would notice when the teacher took someone's arm and conducted for them to show them the movements, that their face just went dead. They were like, you know, but
Yeah,
if you are the one moving your arm, you are still in control and you're observing. So it's the act of observing this push down
yeah,
that probably makes the difference.
yeah. It's a little bit like this. One of the balance exercises I do for people is to learn to have, you know, 5 different voices in the hand. It's just taking um, just as though your arm is floating on the keys. So all the keys are sounding all the time, and then with the other hand, you pick out the notes like ringing, you're striking a bell.
Yeah.
And that keeps going all the time. And then you gradually learn to do that with the hand itself. So you're just using the intrinsic muscles there. So the whole hand's going down together, the same weight, but you're just using a little bit of that for each finger movement we talked about. So when you start to voice it, you actually find that you can gradually, and it's like pupils usually get very terribly depressed when they're doing this to start, because they don't notice much difference to start with. It takes ages, it's like waiting for a photograph to come up in color. But I say, you know, don't go jumping under a bus. You know, leave it at about 4 months, and you'll find it's a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing. You can develop that sensitivity so that each finger feels like a different voice. That's amazing. But that's another case of actually manipulating and watching and then feeling what happens.
I'd like to ask you a question about self-teaching versus having a teacher. I had many very, very good piano teachers, and yet there were some things that they could not teach me, and I wanted very much to learn these things. I've struggled with my piano technique and with being able to do certain things for 40 years, and slowly I have been able to find out what I needed on my own with some of the things they taught me that came into play later.
Yeah.
How much of this can you do by yourself? How much of this should you do by yourself? Can you do any of it by yourself?
Well, I have to say that none of my teachers were able to help them with technique. None of them really knew what was going on. I mean, Empson was the closest, because he was talking about sound and listening, which was a kind of way around, but nobody really knew how the muscles work, how the fingers should feel, the direction of movement. I went through years of having pains in my arms and that sort of thing. When I was at the Royal College, absolutely nobody could help. I I I was given Alexander lessons, which changed my life really, because that opened up a whole new world of experience that way. And I did have wonderful teachers, but none of them knew anything about technique. And one of them just was trying to get me to play something, and I said I can't, because my shoulders are so stiff. So he got hold of them, and he said, yes, they are. And he said, Richard, whose shoulders are these? And I said, well, they're mine. He said, well, you do something about it. And that's the best thing I got there at the Royal College, I think, actually. It's the only thing. Pretty much. No, that's not fair. No, there were good things. But I thought, gosh, he's right. I have to do something.
Yeah.
So I can't wait for somebody to fix it for me. I've got to
Well,
actually.
and yet that is harder than it sounds because
Yeah,
you may not have actually been connected to your shoulders in any meaningful way.
yeah,
Yeah, parts of us are, at an extreme example, if we have a stroke, we can be completely detached from parts of our body. And even though it's your hand, you look at it and it doesn't feel like your hand. This happens to all of us. So finding your shoulders and owning them, more of a challenge than maybe your teacher owned up to.
but I think, excuse me, I think that when you say should we find it out for ourselves, well, yes, we had to,
Yeah.
because that's where teaching was in those days. I think it's moved on. I think people know more now, and I think that if I had a teacher who had taught me the things which I've had to find out over the last 60 years or so, I wouldn't have had all those pains. I would have had a different career. I would have been able to practice for longer. I would have had a bigger repertoire. And I regret that a lot, simply because teachers basically didn't know how to help.
Yeah.
Um,
You on your website you mentioned several people, and I was unfamiliar with them, and I'd like you to talk about why they're important to you. Joan Dixon.
Joan Dixon, she was a wonderful cellist. She she became very interested in how the cello was played. A bit like, I mean, I caught some of my ideas about looking into piano playing from her really, and she wanted to know, she wanted to be able to really help people and work out how they could be helped and devise exercises. And she was very into Alexander technique. Um, and she was the lady who taught my wife, Ruth, who I met at the Royal College. Um, and so we had great discussions with her. And then she invited me because I when I got to know Ruth, I got to play for her cello lessons. And Joan always had um, every 2 weeks she'd have a class where all her pupils would play, and she refused to hear the cello without the rest of the music. She wouldn't call it an accompaniment. It is the rest of the music. You know, the cello has one line, the piano has maybe another 3 lines or 4 lines, and she wanted to hear all of them so she could talk about the music. So I got to play for her other students as well. So I got to do a lot of, I learned a lot of repertoire, I learned a lot of chamber music, which was fantastic. And then she asked me to come along to be accompanist, official accompanist at a um, course given by Paul Roland. I don't know if you've come across him.
Yeah, he was my
He's not,
next on the list. Yeah.
he was the next one on the list. So Hungarian American guy who set up a whole system of studying how the violin was played. And he had kinesiologists, he had all kinds of experts in their fields, scientific people, to look at actually what happened when the violin was played. And he studied videos of hand positions of the famous violinists. He worked out a system of what was going on. And he experimented with it he set up a project in Illinois. I think it lasted 11 years. And he took any kids. They didn't have to pass a test to see how musical they were. They were ungraded. They just, anybody come like as you would just in a school. And they all went through the system, and by the end of it, they were all playing the violin really well without strain. And that fired up my imagination as well. I really wanted to do something similar to for the piano.
Yeah.
But I found I I tried to talk to piano teachers, but I found them very resistant to discussing. I found because teachers work in isolation so often that they devise a system for themselves, and they, in a way, almost have to believe in it. And if somebody comes along and shakes up the system, they get very threatened. And I've had a few angry episodes talking to people, just saying that, maybe there's a possibility that there's a different way of doing this. No, you're just trying to destroy my teaching. You're just trying to destroy me. I remember one lady telling me that. She's very fine musician. I was really sad about that, but we had a cup of coffee, but it all ended in tears. And so there's that kind of thing. It's very hard to get people together. I think cellists, violinists, viola players, they are used to working together. They're used to working in teams. They're much more friendly and they may exchange information. Piano teachers all set up, they're in their own little castle and they have their own system of thought. And it's a little bit dangerous. So,
Yeah, well, hence
yeah,
our conversation. Yeah.
yeah.
What about Raul Tubiana?
Raul Trubiana. Well, I came across him because he was the president of the Institute of the Hand in Paris, and there's some wonderful books by him about how the arm works. But he's also really imaginative, and he talks about the sort of slightly more metaphysical aspects of playing too, and how what the hand represents, and how the hand represents speech and voice and so on. A really wonderful man, and so I studied his thing. He showed a lot more detail in his descriptions of how the hand works, and how the hand conveys different moods and that sort of thing as well. How you can have it. You can have a hand which fights people and spears people. You can have a hand which strokes and calms people, and you can have a hand which prays or whatever. The actual hand itself becomes a different thing in each of these experiences, and you can use that when you're playing an instrument by changing the condition of your hand. But and then I got to know a guy who was Christopher Wynne Parry, who was one of the chief movers of the British Association of Performing Arts Medicine, who knew Tubiana, and Wynne Parry had contributed some drawings to Tubiana's book and that sort of thing. And he invited me to give a talk about anatomy and piano technique at the International Beauchamp Conference once in Glasgow. And I had set up to do this with a PowerPoint display and everything. And who should be sitting in the front row but Raul Tubiana?
Wonderful.
I thought, ouch. But he was so charming, he was very old, and then he said very interesting ideas about this, very interesting. He was just really charming man, which is what you get from his book. He's one of those people who just wants to know things, he's not setting himself up as a great person. But no, he was been a great influence.
I'd like to close the interview by giving you a chance to address 3 groups of people, if you would, if you feel up to it. The first would be beginning pianists. The next would be pianists who are kind of middle of the road, who can play but would like to be at a higher level. And then finally, maybe the pianists at the highest level, if you dare, if you have anything to say to them.
Right. So for the beginner pianists, I would say find a teacher who's nice. That's the important thing. Someone who really loves music and encourages you. It works alongside you to discover music. Because I think little kids particularly, I mean, all kids are musical. And I think that little kids particularly love music and they like knowing about it. But they don't like being sat down and being told, put your hand like this and, learn that and, read that note. That was a wrong note or something, blah, blah. That's not fun. And it's nothing to do with music really. So I think things, someone who's going to help you discover music. I think that's with a little kid, that's the most important thing. Of any memory they have of an unpleasant teacher is going to put them off music for life. I think that's the first thing. So the next group was?
Next group is mid-level pianists, maybe people who are amateurs who play very well, but, they would like to be better.
They're quite difficult because they tend to be more adults, don't they? And I've had several of those and found it very unsuccessful as a whole. I mean, a lot of them haven't had high ambitions. They've been very successful in another field, and music is a hobby, and they've often very bright people and they played it up to a particular level, but they're not really interested in proving it. I'm afraid it's partly my problem because I'm a nerd about that sort of thing, and I like to fix things. If I see something that I can improve, I can't rest until I've helped them fix it. and they're not interested in that. So they're better off with a different sort of teacher. I mean, someone who will just let them go through music and be encouraging, and to give them fingerings and a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of advice about the pedaling, and go through some exams and that sort of thing. But I found I can't do that. I've tried and I can't, because it wouldn't be honest of me to sit there and do that.
So your advice to these pianists is don't come see me because I can't help you.
I think carry on doing it. But I mean, if they, of course, there are those who really want to improve, but the difficulty is then that they feel that maybe they've left it too late and they're afraid that they can't do anything about it. So they kind of, to take the long-term view and thinking, if I do this exercise 3 times a day for the next 5 months, I will have improved. They don't like that idea. They're wanting to play something immediately quite often. I mean, not all of them are like that, but it's a difficult group, and teaching adults is quite a tricky thing because they often know what they want to be taught, if you like. And then they're kind of a bit impatient if you go into the means whereby. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think they're very important people and they need to enjoy it, but they need a different sort of teacher. I'm not saying in any way that they're wrong. I think amateur musicians who play, in a way which isn't at a very high standard but love it are very important, and they should go on doing that. That's very important. But choose your teacher carefully and make sure they carry on having fun. And I feel it's my failure in that sense, that I was unable to help them with that.
What about pianists at the very highest level? What would you say to them?
I'd be looking very carefully at how they're treating themselves, looking after themselves physically. And I think quite often you can play at a very high level and you can win a competition, and then next year you're injured and you may never play again. That has happened far too often. They're stressing themselves out. They're learning too much repertoire too fast. They're trying to play too loud. They're trying to play too fast. They're trying to win the next competition, which is a huge strain mentally and physically. And so I would be very interested in just helping them to. I mean, I've had established pianists coming to me with problems and trying to fix things, and that's quite interesting. That's quite fun to do. And then they are just using themselves badly for some reason. Something a teacher said, or the fact that they're trying to sound like Horowitz and they're not Horowitz. I think being able to do their own thing, feeling able to be themselves in music and playing music differently from other people is really important. And I think, well, if I've heard them say, well, if I play like that, if I play the way I want it, I'll never, I'll be laughed at. I won't be able to do this competition. I said, well, sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes if you do what you believe in, that carries across to the jurors and they actually understand it. But I think that's the main thing I'm looking at, just kind of physical damage and helping them to avoid that.
Yeah. Richard Beauchamp, what a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to carefully and thoroughly explore all these questions with me.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yes, it was a pleasure, and I'm glad to know you.
Good.
Thank you also, audience, for joining us on this trip. I hope that this deep dive into piano technique, which is just scratching the surface, is of interest to you. And if it is, please leave a comment. If you like what you're seeing, please like our interviews. And there's lots more to come. So we will see you all next time.
And thank you very much, Adam. It's really enjoyed that talk.
Thank you very much, Richard. Have a great day.
You too.